start probably in a couple of minutes, just maybe in 2 minutes or so. I'm going to start with question two. I put it up on Moodle for you. It was a question maybe you tried. Question two on page 13. I'm going to do questions two, three, maybe four. Get a couple of questions done, like the ones that'll come up in the exam, and get you familiar with the process of calculating a full weighted average cost of capital. So I'm going to do that in a couple of minutes, maybe in 2 minutes or so, and I'll start. So just give you a couple of minutes. We're on page 13 in your notes, and I'm using the information from Moodle, I guess. I'm going to go through the overhead from Moodle. I'll read the question to you and make sure you're okay with what has to be done first. So just give it another minute or two. Okay, folks, so we have about 30, 31 or something. So I'll start by putting up the overhead for the question number two on page 13 in your notes, and then bring you through the process. This is one you may have tried last week. So if you have, great. If you haven't, don't panic. At least hopefully, if you have any problem, just unmute the voice button, whatever, and then you're on to me, and I can sort of explain anything that's a problem. Or if you want to type something in, no problem. Anyway, let me show you what I have here from the current slide. It was question number two. And in question number two, you had what's called an extract from a balance sheet. And the idea behind the question was that you would try and pick out the information from the balance sheet, and on that basis then attempt the question. So you'd have this information up on Moodle. I put the question, I put the solution, but make sure you're okay with this. you'd have the information in your handout, and you'd have an opening line. The following is an extract from the statement of the financial position, or if you like, the balance sheet for a company. So what I'm going to do, maybe just to show you how I take note of the information, if I share with you the document camera and just bring you through a process of how to write down the appropriate kind of information in the question. So as I read the question, I begin to write down. So I'm just going to read the question as you have it in front of you. The first thing you see is the kind of a template of the balance sheet, an extract from the balance sheet, and I look for the different forms of finance. Just making sure you understand what to take note of. First line on it is to do with ordinary shares, 50 cent each. I'm reading from your handout. Ordinary shares, 50 cent each. That's the original price. And the company took in 5.2 million euros. So 5.2 million euros, your problem there is to figure out how many 50 cents are in 5.2 million euros. Well, there are two 50 cents in a euro, so if I multiply the 5.2 million by 2, I get 10.4 million shares. That's one way of calculating the answer. The other way of calculating the answer is just divide, if you like, the 5.2 million by 0.5 of a euro. That's like identifying the number of half euros that are in 5.2 million euros. You get the same answer. You'll get 5.2 divided by 0.5 gives you effectively 10.4 million shares in the company. So that's your opening piece of information. You see underneath that reserves, they belong to equity. Ignore reserves in all questions because you will have a share price. And then the next piece of information is what's called a preference share. So I'll just take note of what it says here. Again, what you're supposed to do as you read the balance sheet is identify the number of shares, for example, in preference shares. 4.5 million euros taken in. Each individual share would have an original price of €1. So the question is, how many €1 are in 4.5 million euros? The answer is 4.5 million shares. So you're just basically reading the balance sheet like a book and writing down the info. There's a second piece of information for the preference shares, and that relates to the actual percentage and the nominal value, which of course indicates the dividend. I know the dividend is 9 cents here, because you see the 9% preference share and the €1 each. That's just the original price of €1. You give them €1, they promise to pay you 9% of €1 every year, and it never changes. 9% of €1 is 9 cents. The third form of finance is what's called a debenture. That's a borrowing. Borrowing from the public, however. These are debentures issued by the company. People basically lend money to the company. You need to just identify the amount of money that has been lent to the company, not the number of debentures. So the company borrowed 5 million. That's the balance sheet figure. That's the original sum of money borrowed. And the percentage there that you're given is what's called a coupon rate, or the interest rate. So basically, I have some stuff on equity, I have some stuff on preference shares, and I have some stuff to do with what I call a debenture issue. I just keep them separate, so that when I'm reading the information in the question, I don't mix up the information, that's all. You don't have to do this, but this is how I approach it. As I read after the balance sheet, I now know there are three forms of finance. I'd have to work out the cost of equity, the cost of the preference share, and the cost of the debenture. The debenture is a borrowing, a loan facility. Then I see information to do with the ordinary share price, 80 cent ex-dividend. That's a piece of information that's useful, 80 cent. It also tells me the current dividend is 4 cents. That's the dividend around this time. It has just been paid out, I guess, if the price of the share is ex-dividend, but it's the current dividend, and will grow thereafter at 12% per annum. So this is a growth factor. Now, what's happening here is they're telling you all you need to know. And these three pieces of information, the share price, the dividend current, and the growth factor in the dividend, would indicate that it's a dividend growth model. So you'd go to the back of the exam paper, you'll find a formula for dividend growth. You need to calculate what's called next year's dividend, that's what's above the line, divided by the price and add on the growth rate as a separate calculation. So in this question, you don't have to calculate the growth rate, it's given to you at 12%. You also have the dividend per share and you have the current market price. So it's kind of an easy question. We'll see. That's the first piece of the puzzle. Next piece of information, the preference shares are quoted at 72 cent cumulative dividend. So I have a price, but unfortunately it's cumulative dividend. That's written down, CUMDIV. She's at 72 cent. So I know the dividend. The dividend is 9 cent, 9% of €1. If I take 9 away from 72, I have the price X dividend. And that's your only problem here. The cost of the preference share is given to you in the exam. It's always a constant dividend. There's no growth over price. So if you can find the dividend, which we know, and if you can find the price X dividend, you put one over the other and you'll get an answer. And the third guy is what's called a debenture. And it's a 14% coupon, and it tells me the preference shares are quoted. I'm reading the information underneath the balance sheet. 72 cent, and the debenture is 100 nominal. Well, that's always the case. They're always issued in units of €100, but they actually borrowed 5 million. That's a lot of €100. People lend 100 or 200 or 300, but they took in effectively 5 million. And they're trading on the stock exchange, and they have a price, X interest price of 110. So they're a bit above the nominal. They're higher than the original price. It's all to do with supply and demand for that particular type of an investment. Both are irredeemable. Well, irredeemable is the important point for what's called the debenture. If it's irredeemable, it's a permanent source of finance, just as preference shares are a permanent source of finance, and equity is a permanent source of finance, unless the company goes back and buys the shares from the stock exchange. Corporate tax is 12.5%. That's kind of important to do with what we call debentures, because debentures have interest, and interest is tax deductible. But if you see the word irredeemable, you'd go to the back of your exam paper and you'll find there's a formula for irredeemable. Interest, and that's an amount of money, by 1 minus T divided by price. So this was a relatively easy question. You had information to do with cost of equity given to you. You had information to do with the preference share and the price and dividend given to you. And you had information to do with the debenture available to you. So I'll work through the solution, because I did give you this as an exercise. And as it was an exercise for last week, let me just show you what you should be dealing with here. If I go back to the question. And here we have the question. Okay, I just indicated, I hope you're seeing what I'm going to share with you now, this overhead here, and make sure you're okay with this. So just checking now, if you can see what I have put up. I'll stop the share for a second, make sure. I hope you're seeing the solution to this question. I'm going to stop the share for a second and just put up the appropriate one I want you to look at. So I'm going to share this guy with you. So hopefully, yeah, we're good. Okay, so this is the information. So the information I have here is the information in the question. The number of shares, the share price, dividend and growth, number of shares for preference. You can see it's a 9% €1 and it's priced at 72. And then we have a borrowing, 14% coupon, irredeemable, price and a tax rate. So how do we do it? Now, as I say, this is a question you probably did last week. If you didn't do it, don't worry, but make sure you're okay with the guide solution. And this is up on Moodle. Cost of equity is easy. You're given the formula. Find next year's dividend, put it over the price, and add the growth. Now, I did it in euro format. You may prefer to do this in what is called cent format. So you could have had 4 cent over 80 cents, or 4 cents by 1.12 over 80. I did it in euro format, 0.04 by 1.12. You do that with your calculator, or 4 by 1.12 if you want to do it in cent. If you do it in cent, divide by 80, not 0.8. But be consistent, euro format or cent format. You'll get an answer there of about 0.056. You'll add it to 0.12, you'll get 0.176. You'll get a cost in percentage. If you multiply that guy by 100, 0.176, you've got your cost. All costs of capital are in percentage. So this very first one is relatively easy. You get about 17.6%. Understand what it means? It's just saying the company is paying out dividends to the shareholder. The company could potentially buy the share for a score of 80 cents. So keep paying the dividend or buy it back for 80 cents. And the formula is indicating it's about a 17% cost. So to keep the shareholders happy, you have to provide, it's a cost of 17.6%. Now, when you work out the cost of any form of finance, you also have to work out the value. That's easy. It's just the number of shares, in this case, multiplied by the price. So if you have 10.4 million shares, priced at 80 cents, just multiply those two numbers together. Now, you don't want it in cents, you want it in euros, so definitely have to use the euro symbol here. So 10.4 million shares at 80 cent or zero point 0.8 of a euro, you have the weight. In an exam, like the weight would probably be worth 2 marks or so. So, all of these things are important. You'll be getting marks for the cost of equity, maybe 3 or 4 marks, maybe 2 marks for the cost of or the value. So, you're picking up marks all the time, but I'm finished with equity here. What you've done is you've worked out the cost of the equity and you've got a value. That's called the weight or the market value of all the shares. If you move on to the preference share again, you'll see the preference share information, and the dividend is 9% of €1, so we're talking effectively 9 cent. What's the price? The price is given to you in the question at 72 cent. But like the dividend is 9 cent, 9% of €1. So just take 9 away from the 72, you'll end up with 63 cent. That's the price in the formula. So I did it in euro format. There's nothing wrong with putting 9 cent over 63 cent, or 0.09 of a euro over 0.63 of a euro, whatever you prefer. 9 over 63 will give you an answer of 0.143, and you transfer it into a percentage. And the answer then is the cost of the preference share. The company can continue to pay 9 cent, or it could potentially buy back the share for 63. So the ratio of the two is the cost of the company. So it's always lower than the cost of equity. It's to do with the fact that there's less risk from a shareholder's point of view. The preference dividend gets paid out before the ordinary share dividend. Anyway, it's 14.3%. Just like this, you need to figure out the number of shares by the share price. Number of shares, 4.5 million preference shares, but not 72 cents, 63 cents, 0.63. So 4.5 million by 0.63. Hopefully that worked out for you. Again, if you couldn't do this part, you should be able to do this part. The number of shares multiplied by the share price ex dividend. Almost there. The last part of the puzzle is to work out the cost of the debt. Now, if it's an irredeemable, you'd have an exam formula. And the formula is just simply how much interest are they paying? Well, 14% is the coupon, and the nominal value is always 100. It's always a percentage of 100 for the debentures, if they're redeemable or irredeemable. So 14% of 100 is 14. That's the only problem there. So 14, 1 minus the taxes divided by the price. That formula is given to you. So 14 by 1 minus 0.125, that's the tax rate. You'll get an answer less than 14. You'll put it over 110, you get about 11. 0.1114, about 11%. And again, you'll find that consistent in every question. The cost of debt, interest is paid before preference dividend, before ordinary dividend. And it's to do with a risk trade-off. It's the lowest cost. Most importantly, when you're working out the market value of the debenture, you don't look at the number of debentures multiplied by the debenture price. You could if you want, but it's much easier to take the balance sheet figure, much of the borrowing, which is 5 million, that's what you're borrowing, as the balance sheet figure, and multiply it by the price over 100, always comparing it to the nominal. So 110 over 100, that's the only calculation you have to do there. So on the stock exchange, they're not priced at 100, so the market valuation will not be 5 million, they're priced at 110. They're like 10% higher, so 5.5 million is the actual market value. Then you're there, right? You've got the cost of each one in red, and you have the value in each one in blue. So you pick up a huge amount of marks. Even if you get the final part wrong, all of this would involve marks allocated all the way down the line. You'd probably have 90% of the question at this stage. The last thing you do then is you work out the average. And remember, the answer has to be between 17.6, 14.3, and 11.14, somewhere in the middle there. Probably 15 or 16, I don't know. But let's do the numbers. They're like coordinates. You take the 8.32 and the 17.6, you just multiply those guys. Forget the percentage there if you want. And the same thing here, you have a 14.3 and a 2.835. You have a 5.5 and an 11.14. So they're all just multiplied as a bunch of old numbers on top. Below the line is the sum of the weights, 8.32, 2.835, and 5.5. Now, when you get the answer, obviously it's between the 17.6 and the 11, but the weights pull it in different directions. So when you do get the answer, and believe me, this is up on Moodle for you, you'll get an answer around 15%. So if you get an answer close to 15%, we're good. remember, there's marks we picked up for the cost of the equity, the value of the equity, the cost of this, the value of this. So you can get the wrong answer at the end, but still score massively. You could score 80 or 90% of the marks, even if this is wrong at the end. But try and understand the process. That's the important thing. Now, that's the question I kind of gave you as an exercise last week, and hopefully you had a go with it. If you didn't, don't worry. Hopefully you can follow what I have here. It's all strange, and I should practice these questions. But what we're going to do today, I'm going to show you the next question. And this is question 3 on the same page. If you've got the handout in front of you on page 13, just got to put up the next question and give you a couple of minutes to read it. Like I did at the beginning of the class today, I will then write out the information I think you should be pulling from this question. But let me show you the question first of all. This is the guts of what is involved. This is what will happen for you in an exam. You'll have to calculate the cost of the individual sources of finance and then end up with some kind of an average cost of capital. So just for maybe 5 minutes, if you could read that question, what I'll do then is I'll produce the document camera and I'll read the question with you and highlight the pieces in the puzzle that we need to pull out. And then we'll just have a go at the question incrementally, maybe go through each part. There are actually 3 forms of finance in this question. If you're reading the question in your notes on page 11, there's a bit of a preamble at the beginning talking about the company. And then it gets into the meat of the question, which is to do with the cost of capital. So I'll stop for about 5 minutes and give you a little bit of time to maybe to read that, see if you're okay with if you can calculate or read it and take note of what's important here. Sorry there, I was muted. Again, repeat what I was saying. As I read the information in the question, the first line of information here is during the past number of years, the number of ordinary shares in issue has remained constant at 3 million. So that's the 3 million shares. Okay, so we have 3 million shares. And then the next piece of information indicates the actual share price, and the market price per share at present is 135. So I have 3 million shares and 135 is the share price. So even at this point, I would know what's called the market value of the equity. You've got 3 million shares at 135 each. If you multiplied those two numbers, I'd have the market value. That'd be worth 2 marks or so in an exam if you needed to get market value, which you do for the weight later on. Then it tells me some history. It says the company only pays one dividend per year, and for the past number of years, dividends per share have been as follows. Now, so it's dividends per share. So I have year and I have dividends per share. I have years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it started at 10 cents per share, and it grew all the way to 14.9 cents per share. So going from 10 to 14.9 indicates some kind of growth happening here. So in this question, if I was trying to work out the cost of the equity, the appropriate formula would be the one with growth. I'd have to figure out what's next year's dividend going to be, and what is it compared to the price, and add on the growth factor. This is a formula available to you. So your hassle here is the G. I know the current price, and I know the current dividend. The most recent dividend is 14.9 cents. So I have 2 parts of a 3-part puzzle. I know the current market price ex dividend. I know the current dividend at 14.9. I just need to calculate the growth. That's the problem there. That's the first set of information. So I'm finished with that. Then it tells me the company has an issue. So it has something else. 800,000 of 8% debentures. So this is what's called a borrowing facility. The amount they borrowed is 800,000 euros. The coupon is 8%. That's the interest rate. And it's redeemable at par in 5 years. Now, unfortunately, redeemable. Redeemable means it has a limited lifespan. Redeemable in 5 years. So when you get a redeemable, it's kind of complicated in that there's no cute formula to use here. But let's read on. The current market price of these debentures is 82.50 ex interest. So I have a price, and the price is 82.50. So that's the current market price today, and it's ex interest. It's perfect. It says 82.50 per 100 nominal. Well, the nominal is always 100. So just as you have an individual share, you have an individual debenture. And the original price here is €100. And it also tells me that the interest is payable on one amount each year on the 31st of December. That's not important. Just they pay interest once a year. There's one other form of finance. The problem with this one here is you'd have to, unfortunately, calculate an internal rate of return. So this is complicated. That's the hardest part of this question. And then finally, you have a company has a 900,000 bank loan. Now, you haven't seen a loan for a while, but a bank loan. They borrowed from an ordinary old bank. Instead of borrowing from the public, they borrow from a bank like you do yourself. So it's a 900,000 loan. Now be careful with the next sentence. The rate of interest on this loan is variable at 1.5% above the base rate, which is currently 5%. So basically, the rate of interest in the loan is variable, it goes up and down. It's at 1.5% above the bank's base rate, which is currently 5%. You add 1.5 and 5, you'll get effectively 6.5%. So all it's saying there again, the rate of interest of this loan is variable at 1.5% above the bank's base rate, which is currently 5. So 1.5 on top of 5 is 6.5. And the rate of corporate tax in the question is 12.5%. So I'm sure you're probably aware of this. Banks, they get access to money. They can get it from the interbank market. Maybe you're not familiar with this, but anyway, basically what it's saying here is that the bank is getting money at 5%, then it lends it out then to other companies with a profit margin of 1.5% on top. So 5 plus 1.5 is 6.5%. The 1.5% there is the profit margin of the bank. So it's 6.5%. If you get an old bank loan in a question, you haven't seen one in a while, but if you get a bank loan, all you have to do is identify the interest rate. Of course, I know what that is here, 6.5%, and multiply it by 1 minus the tax rate. So the tax rate's put in as a decimal. That's your man here. So what we've done here is we've identified there's a problem with equity, there's a debenture, and there's an old bank loan. You'll find the bank loan easy. You'll find the equity kind of complicated because you have to do a little bit of calculation of the growth, and you'll find the debenture the most difficult because it does involve the calculation of an internal rate of return, which involves discounting. So what I'm going to do is just give you a few minutes. I'm going to break it into three parts. Obviously, the last part you'll find quite easy, I think, but the first part, it's something you've done many times, but you should be able to identify what is the growth rate based on your prior knowledge here. So maybe just before we take a break, if you could have a go at the cost of the equity, let's say, can you figure out the growth rate for the equity, and can you identify the cost of the equity, and of course the market value of the equity? If you could do that, we'll stop then and take a break, and I'll introduce you to the debenture format maybe. So for a couple of minutes, have a go at that and see what you think. Looking at the equity first, and then we'll do the debenture second. See how it goes. just maybe show you the the cost of the equity, and I'll go through it slowly with you. So I'll share a different overhead with you, and I'll bring you through the process. Okay, sorry, 1 second now. So the way in which you can calculate the cost of the equity, you have to understand there's only one piece of the puzzle missing, and that's the actual growth rate. So in the question, I know the current dividend is at 14.9 cent. So 14.9 cent is the most recent dividend available. And also I know the current market price of the share here at 135. The piece I'm missing is the growth rate. So I can use the formula. So how you use the growth rate and how you calculate the growth rate is, first of all, identify the number of years growth. Now be careful with this. Your base year is year 1. And then going to year 2 will be 1 year, to year 3, 2 years, etc. To get to year 6, you'll be talking 5 years after the base. So from year 1 to year 6, effectively, it's 5 years growth. It's just something to remember you've seen it previously in examples. So if I have 5 years growth as an expression for 5 years growth, the expression is 1 plus g to the power of 5. So this old crack here, the power of 5 that's called a compound factor. I know it started with 10 cent, ended up at 14.9, so it grew by about 49%. You put 14.9 over 10, you're talking 1.45. If the answer was 1, there'd be no growth. But to the right of the 1, you have 0.49, like 49% growth. What you have to do then is use your scientific calculator and figure out effectively what number multiplied by itself 5 times gives you 1.49. And how you do that is you get rid of the power of 5. And how you get rid of the power of 5 is you get the whole expression to the power of 1 over 5. So if you get this expression on the left of the power of 1 over 5, the 5 will disappear. You'll end up with 1 plus g, but it'll happen on the right. So 1 plus g will be equal to 1.49 to the power of 1 over 5. You must do to the left and to the right. So power of 1 over 5 you prefer is 0.2. 1 over 5 is just 0.2 in decimal form. Now you can use your scientific calculator to get this whatever way you want. You can use the 5th root, get the power function to the power of 0.2, whatever you want. But basically you get 14.9 over 10, you get 1.49. Then you look for the y to the x function and you input, let's say 0.2. It generates an answer. The answer it will generate is about 1.083, approximately. So you end up with 1.083, about 8%, a little bit above 8% growth. So if I take the 1 on the left and the 1 on the right away, you get your OG there, which is 0.083. I now have all I need. I have the growth at about 8%. Now you could have a slightly different answer here, it's not a problem. In around, a little bit around 8 between 8 and 8.25% or something. Then you got the price, you got the actual dividend. You also are given this formula in the exam. You don't have to memorize this formula. It's only a case of using the formula now. I know the current dividend is 14.9 cent, but it'll grow by about 8% next year. So you take your old 14.9, that's your D there, dividend per share, and you multiply. If you just wait 1 second. Apologies there. I just want to input the information now. So what goes in here is what's called next year's dividend. So the dividend next year will be about 14.9 cent, but it'll grow by about 8%. So you'll be above 15 and so above here. You put that over the price. If you put the dividend in cent, you must put the price in cent. So if I put that in as 14.9, this guy will have to be at 135. You'll get an answer there and you'll add on the growth rate. This is what it looks like. So 14.9 cent by 1.083, that's 1 plus g. I'll get an answer above the line, like 15.5 cent or something. You divide by 135, you'll get an answer for all of this calculation, and as a separate calculation, you add on 0.083. You'll generate an answer around 0.2, in around 20%. If your answer is anywhere close to 20%, around 20 or 20 and a bit, that's perfect. So what have we figured out here? We figured out the company is paying dividends and increasing the dividend every year. It could buy the share back or continue to pay out those kind of dividends. It's about a 20% cost. Second thing you'll do is you'll work out what's called the market value of the equity. And that's quite easy. The market value of the equity is based on the number of shares. And in the question, it's explicit. It tells you there are 3 million shares in the company. And the share price, of course, is 135. So you just take your old 3 million and you multiply by 135 and you get the value of all of the shares. So for each form of finance, your problem is to figure out the cost and then find what's the amount, or in this case, the market value, also known as the weight. So for a lot of you, the hard part of this is just working out the growth rate. So this is a more difficult question to the previous question, obviously, but the idea here is you're trying to calculate the growth rate, but that's something that's regularly examined if you check past papers. Now, the second part of this question, I'll just introduce it and we'll take a little break, but the second part of the question is about what's called the cost of the debt and the cost of the debenture in this case. So if you're trying to work out the cost of the debt, let me again show you, I'll screen share with you what we had previously. We had the document camera in action here, and you'll see the information to do with the debenture. And that information there is a redeemable debenture. The important thing is that's a redeemable debenture. Because it's a redeemable debenture, there's no formula. You'd have to find the cash flows and calculate an internal rate of return. So let me just show you how to find the cash flows and we'll take a little break. But to find the cash flows in that question, if you needed to find the cash flows, and this is how it's done. So you basically are looking at information here to do with the debenture now. So if we're looking at the debenture, you would have to find what are the actual cash flows related to it from the point of view of the corporate. And how you do this, it's just a case of setting up a time frame and then setting up a cash flow. Now, if you're reading the information, you'll see it's redeemable in 5 years. So you'll have 5 years of cash flows. You always begin, and this will be on page 10 of your document, a template of how this works, but you always write down what's the current market price of the debenture. If the company were to go to the stock exchange and buy the debenture, what's its price? In this case, the price is $82.50. So the company could buy it back for $82.50. Then what you would do is you'd identify the interest payments for years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that's called an annuity. So we write it down in the form of 1 to 5. It's all over in 5 years. So in year 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, there'll be an interest payment. The interest is always based on the coupon rate. In your question, the coupon rate was 8%. Now, 8% is always of 100 euro. So if there was no tax in the world, 8% of 100 euro will be 8 euro, and you just write down 8 euro from years 1 to 5. But what you have to write down is the 8 euro multiplied by 1 minus the tax rate. So 8 euro is the physical amount of interest. 1 minus the tax rate is 1 minus 0.125. If you do the maths on this, if you do the calculation of this, you'll end up with a score of 7 euro. So the cost of the interest after tax for years 1 to 5 is not 8 euro, but 7 euro. The interest is 8 by 1 minus t, brings it down to 7. So that's the physical cost after tax from the company's point of view of paying interest on the debt. And then at the end of 5 years, it's all over. The company has to hand back the full amount, always 100 euro. So these are the cash flows, and they're the cash flows related to the redeemable debenture. Now, if you've got a question on a redeemable debenture, you're going to pick up 3 or 4 marks for just identifying the cash flows. That you can identify that the company can buy it for 82.50. It would save having to pay out 7 for 5 years and save having to pay out 100 on its own in one lump at the end of 5 years. A saving in business is a cash inflow. So that's a negative and these guys are positives. So what you'd have to do with that sort of set of information would be to go to the back of your exam paper. You have discount tables, present value and annuity. You'd have to calculate 2 net present values and then interpolate. And it's your choice as to what to use as an initial discount factor. You could choose 5% or 8% or 10%. It makes no odds. But unfortunately, you'd have to take two discount factors, get two NPVs, and interpolate. But we'll take a little break. And when we come back, I'll give you a guide to the solution. I will give you basically the answer. But if you want to, you can try it yourself in your own time. But we've done 2 or 3 examples of this already. I'm not going to do it again with you. But the most important thing is that you do know there are discount tables and there are net present values, 2 of them to be calculated. On that basis, you'll get an IRR. So we'll take a little break for about 15 minutes or so. When I come back, I'll give you the solution to the IRR, and we'll kind of wrap up this question and try and have a look at another question to get you familiar with the kind of question you'll get in the exam in a couple of weeks. In this question, where we have identified the actual cash flows involved here. What we're trying to do now is maybe work out an IRR, but I'm hoping you'd have a go at this. If you haven't today, at least have a go between the now and next week or whatever. But on page 10 in your notes, you would have you'd have a guide as to how to calculate two NPVs. It's a routine, that's all. So you need to use your discount tables, like your present value tables and your annuity table for the 1 to 5, and get an NPV reasonably quickly. If it's positive, go higher. If it's negative, go lower. Just get two NPVs and interpolate. If you do the thing correctly, you'll end up with an IRR, and you'll get something reasonably close to 11.8%. Now, you may not have 11.8%. It could be, again, 11.5 or maybe 12%, but it should be somewhere close to 11.8. So if it's not working out for you, just double check your calculations or send me on an example and I'll show you where you're making mistakes. But definitely, I have an approximate answer here. I expect different answers from different people, but it should be reasonably close to about 11 or 12%, that kind of a score. And when you do this, of course, you also have to work out the market value of the debenture issue. The market value is always based on the balance sheet, which was €800,000, and you multiply that by the price over 100. So in our case, if you multiply 800,000 by the price, which of course is 82.50 over 100, you'll get an answer of about €660,000. Now this will be up on Moodle today. I'll put all of these solutions up on Moodle, so don't worry if you're not getting the information taken down. But 660,000, or if you like 0.66 million, because I actually did the equity in 4.05 million. So maybe to keep it consistent, I'll keep it in millions. So in all cases, you have to work out the cost and the market value. And the market value, again, is simply the balance sheet figure or the amount they borrowed by the price over 100. It's a bit less, 660, not 800. It's a discount, major discount. The last thing you have to do here is the cost of the loan, and that's very simple. The rate given in the question was 6.5%. You just need to adjust that for corporate tax. So when you're working out the cost of the loan, there's your 6.5%, multiplied by 1 minus t, you get the actual after-tax cost of the loan, which is about 6%, 5.7% or so. The value of the loan is never a problem. It's just simply the size of the loan. You've nothing to do there. It doesn't trade on the stock exchange. So you just take your 900,000 score. So now you've worked out the cost of the equity already. We've got a 20% or something score. You've got a value of about 4 million. You've got the cost of the debt, in this case the debenture, at around 12%, and a value of about 0.66 million. And you have a cost of a loan about 5.7% or something, and a value of about 0.9 million. The very last thing you have to do in the question, as I said, this will go up on Moodle, will be to work out the average. 4 million by about 20%, 0.66 million by about 11.8 or 12%, and 0.9 by 5.7 or so percent. Below the line is the sum of the weights. Now this will be up on Moodle, so don't worry if you don't get to take all the detail down. But you have to remember, I have three costs, 20.25, 11.8, and 5.69. We're going to get what's called an average, somewhere between the 20 and the 5 or 6% there. So when you do all the maths on this, when you multiply 4 by 20.25 and 0.66 by 11.8 and 0.9 by 5.69, you divide by the sum of the weights. That's the blue numbers. It was 4.05 million for the equity, 0.66 for the debenture, and 0.9 for, in this case, the bank loan. When you get the average, you'll get in around 17%, about 16.9. Now everybody could have different answers to this final score depending on your IRR. That's something you need to practice. You need to practice the internal rate of return technique. But we spent 2 weeks doing it at the very beginning of the year, and we did another example or two earlier on. And as I say, on page 10 of your notes, you have the template for how to go about calculating an internal rate of return for a debenture. So it's something you should be familiar with. So this question here, question 3, it was descriptive in style. You read information and took notes as you read the information. You had 3 forms of finance. You had a difficult cost of equity because you had to calculate a growth rate. You had a difficult cost of debenture because it was a redeemable debenture. And you had a relatively easy cost of a loan there, the last guy. So it's very quick. But the end result is in around 16-17%. That now is the cost of all the finance and effectively what's called the company's target rate of return. So what I want to do is finally show you a question, and it's question number 4 in your handout, and it's a question with 5 different forms of finance. So what you have here up on in front of you that I just produced is going up on Moodle in about an hour or so. I put up, don't worry if you didn't get to take down the detail of the solution here. So I'll put up the solution to question number 3 on Moodle in an hour or two. And I'll just introduce you to question number 4. And I want to make sure you're okay with what question 4 indicates. So if you have your notes, you're moving on to page 14 in your notes. So on the top of page 14. But it's a question where you actually have many different forms of finance. In your exam question at the end of the semester, you'll have 2 or 3 different forms of finance. The question I'm about to show, and I'm going to put it up on the overhead now, the question I'm about to show you will have effectively about 5 different forms of finance. So there's a lot of information coming at you. So just for a few minutes, I'll let you read this question, to have a look at question number 4. Have a read and see, can you see what's happening in question number 4? And what I'll do then is I will run through the question with you, making sure you know what is to be taken from the question. And we'll try to get towards the end of this question today. It has 5 types of finance, so don't worry in your exam, you'll have 2 or 3. But this question covers every possibility. It's not that difficult a question, even though it has 5 different forms of finance. And you'll see that actually through it, maybe. So for a few minutes, see, can you read what's happening in the question? If you didn't follow anything in the last example, if you want to unmute your mic and ask a question, or if you want to put something in the text or in the chat, sorry, please do, no problem. So I'm going to leave you for about 5 minutes just to read the question first of all, and then I'll come back to you and I'll run through what's going to happen as I write down the information. So see what you think.
George. Again.
reading the question, you have it. It's a lot of information coming at you, and it has a substantial amount of different forms of finance. I'm going to maybe highlight a few things you should note here, and I'm going to write out the kind of info I'd be interested in. If you got a question like this, I promise you, you won't get a question with 5 different forms of finance. But if you look at this question here, you have a kind of a balance sheet. It's also known as a statement of financial position. Inside that, it's kind of a historical reference document which indicates where the company got its sources of funding, where the funding has come from. So we have ordinary share capital, that's equity if you like. We have 9% preference shares, €1 each. That's kind of a different form of finance. Preference shares, it pays a constant dividend. Reserves are just an accounting procedure. They belong to the ordinary shareholders, but I will be using share price, you'll see. The 25-cent share value is the original price, but there is a price today, and that will reflect reserves. We have 11% loan stock. Don't be panicking if you see the word loan stock. It's another form of finance. It's really just also known as a debenture. You'll see different textbooks use different terminology, but loan stock is simply a loan to the company. The company issues a loan, effectively, or issues a debenture or loan stock format. That's redeemable. Then you have what's called irredeemable loan stock or irredeemable debenture. Again, it's a loan to the company. They issue this kind of a set of documents which would be a loan to the company. And then they finally have a bank loan. So we have effectively an ordinary old bank loan from a bank, obviously. You've got some kind of borrowing from the public that's irredeemable, a borrowing from the public that's redeemable. You have preference shares issued to the public. They bought them and they're going to get a fixed dividend. And there are ordinary shares that the company has issued and people bought them as well, and they hope to get that dividend and maybe a growing dividend or something. This information below here relates to the current market prices of the different forms of finance and the tax rates and maybe the interest rate on the bank loan. They don't tell you the interest rate on the bank loan in the balance sheet. It'll be further in the notes of the company. So the question is calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So what I'm going to do with you is to share maybe the document camera and show you what I would take note of in this question. So if you have the document camera in front of you here, as I read the information, I will write down what I see. So what I see are, first of all, ordinary shares or equity. Now be careful as you read the information. All I'm trying to take note of here is what are the numbers involved. So if I'm reading the balance sheet, I can see ordinary share capital, 25-cent shares. That's an original price of the share. And the company took in 90 million euros. Your question effectively here is how many 25 cents are in 90 million euros? Now there are 4 25 cents in a euro. So if I multiply the 90 by 4, which is 360 million shares in the company, that's one way of doing it. The number of shares here, it's not 90 million. It's 90 million divided by 0.25. How many effectively quarter of a euro or 25 cents are in 90 million? So if you put 90 and divide by 0.25 euro, you'll get 360. We're talking millions of shares here. Or 4 25 cents in a euro, 4 times 90, 360 million shares in this company. Second form of finance is what's called a preference share. If you have a preference share in the balance sheet, it'll indicate some kind of a percentage and a nominal value. 9%, €1 preference shares, 50 million raised. How many €1 are in 50 million euros? It's the same number of shares. So we're talking 50 million shares here that are preference shares. The preference shares, you'll see a percentage, which is the coupon, if you like, rate, and a nominal value, which is the original price. Those two guys tell me the dividend here is 9 cents. So I can see a lot of information in the preference shares. I can see the number of shares, and I can actually see the dividends that the company is going to pay. As I go down through it, there's another form of finance. So that's ordinary shares. That's your own preference shares. Now I see what are called, ignore reserves, I told you before. You see what is called 11% loan stock, redeemable in 5 years. And how much was borrowed? We have a debenture issue, if you like, debt, I call it. But you borrowed 80 million euros. Big company. They borrowed 80 million euros. And you'll see a coupon or a percentage score, 11%. That's the interest rate. Unfortunately, they're redeemable. So when you see the word redeemable, This relates to the idea of you having to calculate what's called an internal rate of return, redeemable in 5 years. So 5 years to run, that's all that means. They have a loan for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, they have to hand back the 18 million. And next piece of information is another coupon rate, and it's irredeemable loan stock or irredeemable debenture, 95 million. So I have another form of debt or debenture, 95 million they borrowed. So what was the amount of 95 million? What's the coupon rate? 10%. Don't worry about why the rates are different. Your focus is simply take the information and work out the cost. So we have 10% irredeemable loan stock. So that's going to be a borrowing that's permanent. They never have to pay it back, believe it or not. They have just got to pay interest every year in perpetuity, 10% interest. And lastly, we have a bank loan. So a bank loan, I'll use the letter L, let's say here for the bank loan. And how much did they borrow? They borrowed 60 million. So it's a big company. I mentioned this is irredeemable. So you understand that is not a redeemable situation. Now, so what I have here is some information on redeemable debt, some information on irredeemable debt, and I've got some information on an old bank loan. And then as I read the question, I will see further information. I know at this stage I have to get the cost of equity, the cost of the preference share, the cost of the redeemable, the cost of the irredeemable, and the cost of the bank loan. 5 different forms of finance. But as I read into the question, then it talks about the ordinary share price ex-dividend 175. So back up here, making sure I don't mess it up. 175 is the price of the share, the ordinary share. In the question, it's explicit. Ordinary share price 175. You multiply that by 360 million, I have the value of all the equity, worth 2 marks. But anyway, what else have I got? I got the dividend just paid was 20 cents. So I have some kind of dividend paid, 20 cents, current dividend, if you like, and expected to grow by 5% per annum. So what have I got there? I've got information that relates to some kind of a dividend growth format. So I would use that information to identify the cost of the equity. So again, if I'm trying to work out the cost of the equity, I'd go to the back of the exam paper, I'd find the dividend growth model. What's next year's dividend divided by price, and add on the growth. I'd be able to work it out. The next piece of information, preference shares, it tells me in the question are priced at 0.67 of a euro ex-dividend. So I have a price of the preference share, and their ex-dividend, which is great, 0.67. So what's the story here? If I have a question to do with preference shares, I go to the back of the exam paper. Again, I get a formula. It's always a constant dividend over price. Just put the dividend over the price. If the dividend's in cent, put the price in cent. If the dividend in euro, put the price in euro. That kind of crack. That's a little formula that's available to you. Reading through the question, the next piece of information it tells me that there's an 11% stock. That's the redeemable guy, the 11% stock. It tells me that guy is priced at 95x interest. So your man here has an x interest 95 euro price. This fellow's a problem because you'll have to work out, unfortunately, an I or. I may leave you with this as an exercise because it's a great question from the point of view it covers 5 different forms of finance. Anyway, you'd have to work out an I or there and identify the cash flows over the 5 years. As you read on, then it tells me another guy. It tells me there's a 10% stock. That's the 95 million borrower at 10%. The 10% stock, nominal 100, priced at 72 x interest. Oh no, price your man here at 72. Quite a discount. So that's the price of what's called the irredeemable. If you get an irredeemable question, there's a formula. So you just have to go to the back of the exam paper again, you'll find an old formula. And the formula is simply the interest payable, which covers 10% of 100 nominal, or the tenor in this case, by 1 minus t, haven't got the tax rate yet, divided by the price. You'll be given that formula, you have to memorize it. But you need a piece of information to go in there that's missing so far. I've got the tax rate. And the last piece of information it tells me the bank interest rate currently 10%. So they're borrowing 60 million at 10%. interest. The current rate of interest in the economy for that particular loan for the company is 10%. And the corporate tax rate is 12.5%. I'll put it there. Now, the tax rate will affect anything that is interest payment. That includes the redeemable debenture, the irredeemable debenture, and in this case, the bank loan. You know, bank loan in the question, you have to remember that you take the interest rate, and you multiply by 1 minus the tax rate. So that's the kind of information I would take note of. I'd have information to do with cost of equity, cost of preference share, cost of debenture, cost of the irredeemable debenture, and the bank loan. So in this question, really what's happening is, it looks a horrible question, but you'll find the cost of equity is very quick, and the cost of the preference share will be very quick. The cost of the irredeemable debenture will be very fast, and also will be the cost of the loan. The man here is the only hassle. So it looks like a substantial question, but there's only one piece in the puzzle that's quite complicated. So I think it's kind of useful from your point of view that if you could have a go at this question yourself, you went through each of them. I need you to get the cost of each of the 5 guys. And then I need you to work out the market value for the equity, for the preference share, for the redeemable, for the irredeemable. The market value of the loan is 60 million. And then see, could you calculate a WACC? So I think it would be useful if I left it as an exercise for you. And what I'll do is I'll put up the solution in an hour or two up on Moodle for you. I'll put up the solution for questions 3 and 4. I'll put up question 5 and question 6. And also there's an old MCQ question there. I'll put that whole lot up. We have finished the cost of capital. So I'll put up the solutions to all of the questions. And I will, I'll stop the share there on this thing for the moment. And if you want to ask a question, please do. But I think if you practice that question 4, and maybe have a look at, questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, be familiar with those. You can have a look at question 5 and 6 in your own time as well before the exam, obviously. But I hope to have time at the end so we can go over past exam papers. I hope to do maybe 1 or 2 sessions with you. And what I'm going to do next week with you is just to get to the end of this handout, I have to introduce you to investment appraisal. I'll do a little bit on it, very little. I just introduce it because we're going to spend a bit of time on it in the second semester. But if you're okay with what we did today, I'd like you to have a go at that question instead of me doing the question for you. It's a very good example to practice. And I will then in the next hour or two, I'll put up the solutions to all of the questions. And then we'll maybe have one more session next week, if not a week and a half, and then get to the revision, get to the actual exam papers. I'll look at 2019 and hopefully maybe 2018 as well. We'll focus you in the exam and what's going to be examined and what you need to know. So if you're okay, we'll stop. I'm going to stop very early, obviously, but hey, what about it? If you're okay with this, we'll stop now. If you want to ask a question, just unmute and ask away. Otherwise, or send me something in the chat, and I will put up the solutions to each question. So if you missed something, if you missed a piece of any question, it'll be up on Moodle in the next hour or two. So if we're okay, we'll stop early. And we'll talk to you next week. We're almost at the end of the course, so we're getting towards the end. If you have a question, just unmute and I'll gladly answer it. The Christmas exam is worth 80%. I'll check that.
Por uma piton, acredita? Um ser humano sendo devorado por uma piton, meu irmão. Olha que vídeo louco. Mas pera. Calma que piora. Calma que eu vou analisar esse vídeo aqui com você, que é o biólogo Henrique, o biólogo das cobras, vai passar ciência nível hardcore na força da galera, mas em forma de diversão. Então a gente vai analisar esse vídeo aqui, aonde estas pessoas acharam um cara desmaiado, pronto para ser devorado por uma piton. Mas será que isso é verdade? Porque esse vídeo está circulando na internet e todo mundo me mandando.
So I've answered a few there in
Ó,
the
crédito
chat. If you have any
vaiado?
more questions in the chat, put them in.
Não. Beleza. Levantou o camarada. Res- A pior massagem cardíaca que eu já vi na minha vida. Aquilo ali não é massagem cardíaca, porque machuca, né? Vai que a natureza já tinha mordido o meu mundo ali. O bicho é forte, você não tem ideia de como a Piton é forte. Aí todo mundo vai, puxa, vamos puxar a Piton, tal. Olha o cara com a camisa de Piton ali, ó.
So I put up the solutions to all of those questions on Moodle for you now in the next few minutes. Take care.
Eita, Lelê. Isso tá pior do que o ET Bilu, meu irmão. Minha nossa. Do cardápio de nenhum animal. Nós não temos predador, foi pego. Então,
pelo menos 21.000 pessoas mortas nas listas de eleitores da Pensilvânia. É isso mesmo. Conforme noticiou o jornal Breitbart News, um processo movido pela Public Interest alega que há pelo menos 21.000 mortos nas listas de eleitores na Pensilvânia. O processo alega que a Pensilvânia falhou em manter razoavelmente seus registros de eleitores de acordo com as leis federais e estaduais a tempo para a eleição presidencial. Em 7 de outubro de 2020, pelo menos 9.212 registrantes estavam mortos há pelo menos 5 anos. Pelo menos 1.990 registrantes morreram há pelo menos 10 anos e 197 registrantes até agora morreram há pelo menos 20 anos, diz o processo. A Pensilvânia ainda deixou os nomes de mais de 21.000 indivíduos mortos nas listas de eleitores menos de um mês antes de uma das eleições gerais mais importantes para detentores de cargos federais em muitos anos. De acordo com o processo, cerca de 92% das 21 pessoas mortas nas listas eleitorais da Pensilvânia morreram antes de outubro de 2019 e cerca de 216 mostram créditos eleitorais após datas de morte listadas federalmente em 2016 e 2018, alega a ação. Mas como se isso tudo não bastasse, a recontagem no condado de Michigan foi concluída e adivinhem só o resultado? A vitória foi surpreendente para Donald Trump. O condado de Antrim, em Michigan, apresentou o resultado da recontagem de votos e divulgou os dados atualizados. O novo resultado apurado mostra uma mudança no vencedor. Segundo informações da Apple Times, Joe Biden, que na primeira contagem havia obtido 62% dos votos, caiu para 42,7%, mais de 20%. Donald Trump, por sua vez, obteve a recontagem, um percentual correspondente a 57,3% da votação. As autoridades do condado de
Matchmasters is a head-to-head match 3 competition.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Katie's Insight, where I give my insight on all kinds of things, including news, business, finance, politics, most importantly right now, stimulus. But election, oh my gosh. I told y'all, I knew stimulus was going to be nuts.
just for Joe Biden. They have done it in every way imaginable, from having dead people vote in massive numbers to absolutely fraudulently creating ballots.
Welcome to Battle Night. This is a brand new Hero Collector idle game that just came out a couple of days ago. So if you do want to, it's in. Someone even brought their dog. It's important that dog might. problems with Trump derangement syndrome is every once in a while he actually has a point. Now, the reasons he gives may be a bit of horse crap, but he might actually have a point. But the problem is when you're in the throes of Trump derangement syndrome, you just can't ever give him an inch. So you've got to say anything that he's saying is completely and utterly wrong. Not only is it completely and utterly wrong, but it is so stupid. It is so moronic. It is so pathetically banal that it should not come out of a president's mouth. And then the problem that you get into is, again, maybe if he has a point, possibly for the wrong reasons, you've just put yourself into a situation where you've kind of painted yourself into a corner. So yeah.
It is election day in 5 states, including Georgia, where voters faced broken voting machines and hours-long lines in the heat. Georgia's
Our I-Team's been looking into alleged voter fraud across Nevada. During today's news conference by the Trump campaign announcing a lawsuit against Clark County, one woman said she went to vote only to be told that she already had voted. It's a story our I-Team's David Charnes broke earlier in the week, and David is here with more on that. David.
So, John, we profiled Jill Stokey during our 6 o'clock newscast back on Monday. She's legally blind and needs help to vote. But when she went to vote early, she was told she had already voted. Now, Stokey showed us the device she uses to help her see, and she says she went to go vote in person, but was told her mail-in ballot was sent in and that her signature matched. But Stokey is adamant she did not vote and believes her ballot was stolen. Clark County's Joe Glorio did not go as far to say Stokey was lying when he spoke today, but said in their mind she did vote.
I personally dealt with Ms. Stokey. She brought her claim to me, we reviewed the ballot, and in our opinion, it's her signature. We also gave her an opportunity to provide a statement. If she wanted to object to that and provide a challenge to that, she refused to do so. A member of the Nevada Secretary of State's Office investigation team also interviewed her, and they had no issue with the assistance that we tried to give her. I have nothing else to comment on that. Next question.
So the reporter saying, did you think she is lying? He said, no response. Now, in that news conference earlier announcing that lawsuit, Stokey mentioned us here at Channel 8 saying that I had told her we had received emails and calls about voting inconsistencies. I told Stokey when I spoke with her on Monday, and the I-Team has repeatedly reported that voter fraud is extremely rare in Nevada and across the country, and our sources here tell us that there is no widespread coordinated effort of voter fraud that they are aware of. We'll have much more on this story tonight starting at 4 o'clock. For now, I'm David Charnes, 8 News Now.
All right, David, thank you very much.
What's next for President Trump if he officially loses the election and Joe Biden is inaugurated president next January 20th, 2021?
My prediction is he probably takes a few weeks off. He'll want to stay relevant. He likes attention, so he'll probably have a television show and or a television channel in his future.
Trump family biographer Gwenda Blair says his sole purpose after leaving the White House will be to make money.
From all indications, and certainly from recent reports about his financial situation, he will be scrambling to find another source of income.
Barbara Rez, former VP of the Trump Organization and author of Tower of Lies, What My 18 Years of Working with Donald Trump Reveals About Him, thinks a move is in his future.
I think that he would maybe leave the country.
Where do you think he'd go?
I don't know, I was speculating about that too, and I was thinking maybe an island nation or something like that.
He did hint at that possibility at a rally a few weeks ago, but everyone assumed it was a joke.
Could you imagine if I lose my whole life? What am I going to do? I'm going to say I lost to the worst candidate in the history of politics. I'm not going to feel so good. Maybe I'll have to leave the country. I don't know.
Almost 70 million Americans voted for Trump, so one possibility is that he will run again in 2024, although he'd be 78 years old.
Running again in 2024, when he'll be really pushing it age-wise, seems unlikely, but he's got a lot of proteges named Trump in the wings, also one named Kushner. So I think that he'll be very busy promoting what he would hope to be a
Scaramucci believes it's Ivanka who President Trump is going to push to enter the political arena.
I think he would love to see her be the first woman president.
And what of Trump's marriage to Melania? Will it survive post-presidency?
I don't think she's going anywhere. I think being the wife of Donald Trump and living in a very luxurious, gilded life seems to be something that she likes. And if she's out of the scrutiny of the White House, all the better.
The president and first lady have been married for 15 years.
Professor Barbanes joins us tonight. Professor, thank you for your time. Before we go to America, this is what I argued in Queensland. While the treatment of coronavirus was an issue, there were a stack of other issues, weren't there, that the opposition failed to prosecute?
Well, there's no such thing as a single issue election, and people have multiple reasons for voting. In the United States, the performance on coronavirus, despite all the shrill words from the intelligentsia of the country, has been pretty similar to pretty much every other developed country that's not an island. In fact, the worst performing states are the Democratic strongholds of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And with public health mainly being managed at the state level in the United States, well, those four states are the ones that have the epic fails of their citizens. I mean, my best friend's mother died in New York State in a nursing home when Governor Cuomo sent home all the patients from the hospitals. The same thing Boris Johnson did in the UK. That resulted in the high death rates in the UK. In my mother's hometown in Cedar Falls, New Jersey, they had 40 coronavirus deaths, 39 of them in a single aged care facility. Again, because coronavirus patients were sent home from hospitals to aged care facilities by the governors of their states, not by Donald Trump or the federal government.
I noticed an exit path, a very valid point you made, by Edison Research for major American television networks, which said only 2 out of 10 voters nominated the pandemic as the most important issue. What are we to make of not just a president, but a candidate for the presidency who doesn't appear, who seems to have been protected at every turn by the media? He cheated at university. It's his 4th crack up the gig. In 1988, he was found to have lifted material from other people's speeches. Then there's the Sun, and the business of the Sun being employed by a Ukrainian energy company at $50,000 a month. Can't speak Ukrainian, but the energy company's facing charges of corruption. They wanted Hunter Biden to fix a meeting with the American vice president. They got it, and the Ukrainian prosecutor is sacked. And then his ex-business associate, this Tony Bobulinski, holds a press conference just before the second presidential debate and accuses Biden of lying about his involvement. Well, no media outlet except for Fox News has covered any of this stuff.
Well, look, those are all valid points. They're also criticisms of Donald Trump and his business dealings. But what I'm really concerned about is the potential for voter fraud that you were leading with in the earlier segment. If I can talk to that a little bit. Australia invented the secret ballot, and people in Australia might be think it's a very normal thing to have a secret ballot. Do you know what it's called in the United States? It's called the Australian ballot. And there are 3 aspects to the Australian ballot, as we understand it. A pre-printed ballot form that's filled out. It's only available in a voting station, and it's filled out in